and welcome back to FranklinCovey's twice weekly podcast on Leadership with Scott Miller. That's me. I'm your host, just shy of 7 years and 500 episodes, where every Tuesday and Friday I am privileged to join you and a guest or two on this podcast, where FranklinCovey allows me to spotlight and interview some of the world's most renowned thought leaders. They show up in different forms and fashions. Entrepreneurs, CEOs, creators, artists, academics, practitioners. Sometimes they're celebrities or athletes or people that have done something or dedicated much of their life to a topic, and they bring their insights to our podcast to help make you a better leader, a better person, more effective. FranklinCovey, of course, is the sponsor of our podcast and is known to many around the world as the world's most trusted leadership firm. FranklinCovey, founded in part by one of my heroes and the author of the seminal book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, who co-founded this firm, 4 decades ago. Each week we have fascinating conversations to make you more effective. And today I'm delighted to invite two of my friends and colleagues that have just released a new book titled Meaningful Work. Wes Adams and Tamara Myles. Tamara, first, welcome to On Leadership.
Thank you, Scott. I'm so delighted to be here.
Wes, welcome as well.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
So you've written this book with what might be the best cover of the year. So congratulations on it, having great insight or vision or just a great designer with your publisher. Great covers mean a lot. How to ignite passion and performance in every employee. I mean, who's not interested in that topic? Let me level set again. For those of you who are joining us, whether you're listening or watching, today we have Wes and Tamara, who have dedicated much of their lives to helping organizations build cultures and strategies that leverage the collective talent of their people. You know, to quote any great researcher, take care of your people and they'll take care of your customers. Your book is titled Meaningful Work: How to Ignite Passion and Performance in Every Employee. That will be the nature of our conversation for the next 30 minutes. Now, we have two guests. They're co-authors and friends and colleagues, and they're joining us from both Boston and Atlanta here in the U.S. Let's start first with Tamara Myles. I'd love to know a little bit about your background. Take a few minutes and re-engage our listeners and viewers to why and how you came to co-author this book with Wes, and then Wes will have you do the same.
I started my career in advertising, and I worked under a leader. My second job as a young advertiser in New York City was under a leader who really brought out the best in me. She believed in me. She gave me opportunities to really challenge myself and grow. And as my career advanced and, moves and things like that, I worked for other leaders and in other organizations where work didn't feel meaningful at all. It was draining and I wasn't excited to go to work. And so I started getting really curious about, well, it's not the job itself. What is it? And so, that led me to explore productivity and time management, how we spend our time. And I did 15 years of that work and wrote a book. My first book was on a productivity system. And I came to realize that productivity is really important. Time management is really important, but there's a bigger power that unleashes that sense of engagement and passion for the work that we're doing. And that was meaningful work. And so I went back to school at the University of Pennsylvania to really study the science behind this virtuous cycle of, when we're more productive, we have more time to spend on things that really matter. But when we spend our time doing meaningful work, we become more productive. And so I went back to school. That's where Wes and I met and started this research and, interviewing and working with top leaders that work really hard to create meaning at work. And we're really excited now to be here launching this book.
All right, Wes, tell us your path. First, how did you meet Tamara? And then what was your path similarly to complement her expertise in co-authoring Meaningful Work?
Tamara and I actually met on the first night of our applied positive psychology program at Penn, and there were a group of us that had dinner at a Chinese restaurant, one of those tables where you spin the lazy Susan around and everybody orders a bunch of things and shares it. And we ended up seated next to each other, and we kind of talked about why we had come to the program and figured out that they were very similar things. And then over the course of the next couple of semesters, I essentially badgered Tamara into working together on our thesis, and then eventually working together professionally. So it worked out pretty well. It was happenstance that worked out pretty well. And I ended up coming to that program, like Tamara said, with this idea of wanting to understand what made a great team, what made a great organization. I started in hospitality originally. I spent about 10 years opening nightclubs, restaurants, event space in different parts of the country, and then moved on to social enterprise businesses. So I was always kind of entrepreneurial and launching and scaling new businesses and working with very diverse groups of people, sometimes internationally. And some of those organizations were amazing and they felt like a family, and I was excited to be there. And then others, even some of the mission-driven ones that I thought were going to be really meaningful places to work, ended up not being. There were places that had a very strong mission drive, but weren't great places to work, or I wasn't learning, or the people weren't very friendly. And so I was really interested in deconstructing that idea of how do you architect an amazing place to work, and what's a leader's role in doing that? And so that's what brought me to Penn, and what led to our research and all of the interviews that we've done to eventually write this book.
Wes, thanks for the intro. Let's stay with you for a moment. I think it's almost a cliche now to say the pandemic changed us. And I don't think it just changed the younger generation, who's well known now for wanting more meaning and purpose in their employment. Their values are very different, or at least at the surface level, than perhaps people of your and even my generation. The fact is, who doesn't want meaningful work? Hasn't everybody's values shifted? I think we've almost forgotten, right? 1 million people just here in the US died as a result of the pandemic. Some directly, some indirectly. But I don't know anybody whose values didn't shift, and the tolerance for workplaces that don't care about us, or leaders that treat us poorly, or missions that aren't connected to our work. I don't know anybody who doesn't have that as a top value now. Talk about why you and Tamara focused on meaningful work, and perhaps maybe reinforce the fact that it's ubiquitous across every generation.
Absolutely. I think it's hard to believe we're 5 years on from the pandemic at this point. I think this movement for meaning was growing pretty substantially before the pandemic happened. And when we experienced that, it really accelerated things. It forced all of us to take a step back and to really think about how we were spending our time, what was really important to us, what really matters, right? And a lot of the old structures of work, the ways that we've traditionally been doing things for many years, don't necessarily lend themselves to jobs that are meaningful. And I'll say just for a second, Scott, it's really important to point out that when we talk about meaningful work, we don't just mean working at a nonprofit or working in healthcare. We're talking about moments of meaning that can happen in every job every day. It doesn't mean that job has to be your life's calling, but it does mean that that job can have moments that are worthwhile, that it's worth showing up to, that we feel like we've accomplished something meaningful. And those moments come from what we call the 3 C's: community, contribution, and challenge, which are the 3 sources of meaning at work.
Tamara, expand on that, because I think this is a topic that every C-suite, every board, every leader in the world needs to be engaged in, because we have a new set of opportunities, right? When people quit their jobs now, and as a leader you ask them, so where are you going? It's common for them to say, I don't know. And you can say back, no, it's okay, really, you can tell me. And they say, I don't really know. I mean, it's a new creator economy. I can open an Etsy store, I can be an entrepreneur, I can be a solopreneur, I can do anything I want to, but I don't want to keep doing this because life is too short not to have joy and meaning in whatever it is you do. How would you add to that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, we interviewed thousands of people across over 25 industries. And, people want the third of their lives that they spend working to mean something, to matter. And those three C's came up again and again as the most important um, factors that make work meaningful. So, community is about being able to show up authentically and feel a sense of belonging. It's really understanding how you matter to the organization and those that are leading you and those colleagues you're working with. Contribution is a sense that what you do matters, that what you spend your time on is making a difference to something outside of yourself. And challenge is this idea that we are learning and growing and developing, and that, leaders there believe in you and give you these opportunities to grow. And those three C's are what really kind of bring out the best in us, and it's possible in every job, every day, like Wes said, because it's really what we find is that meaning is more about frequency than intensity. Sure, sometimes, some moments when something extraordinary happens feels really meaningful, but those are rare. But when you have frequent moments of meaning, those make our jobs and our days really meaningful and make us want to show up with passion, and performance.
Tamara, you said 1/3. I think you meant 3/3, because in my life it's 3/3 working. What do you know that I don't know? Let's go deeper in that. So every leader needs to have some responsibility, if not a lot of responsibility in creating moments that matter, meaningful moments. In your research, Tamara, did you find that the leverage point was the broader culture? Was it the brand? Was it the mission? Was it the leader? Was it the team themselves? What are the key contributors to creating an environment where employees choose a high level of engagement? We know that leaders don't create engagement. Leaders create the conditions for people to choose their own level of engagement. What does the research show?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And our research was really clear, and it was a really surprising finding for us. Leaders are responsible for almost half of our individual sense of meaningful work. And so while all these other factors you mentioned play a part, your leader, your manager, the people you work with. And when we say leader, it doesn't just mean your direct manager. It can mean the C-level executive that's shaping culture, but it could also mean a colleague that has influence on how you show up, right? And so everybody at every level can be a leader. And in our study, we found that when leaders focus on those three C's, they really create meaning at work for everyone. And so it's really critical what you said about shaping the environment, that leaders are intentional about shaping the environment. And you talked about engagement, and we spend so much time in leadership focused on engagement and measuring productivity and retention. And those outcomes are really important and measurable. And of course, we need to focus on them. But what we find is that meaningful work is the leading indicator. So when leaders make work meaningful, all those other outcomes that we care about, come true from the experience of meaningful work. So when work feels meaningful, we are more engaged, we're more productive, we stay longer, we are advocates for our organization, our products, we interact with customers better. So it's a really important factor.
Wes, I'm going to come to you next and talk about my favorite part of the whole book is around beginnings. Tomorrow, I'm going to stay with you just for a moment before that. Big debate in corporate America, for that matter, professionals around the world, is this sort of back to work, back to the office, right? Everybody's trying to find their way. Some are doing it more thoughtfully than others. But I once heard an executive talk about how they were justifying their kind of back to the office 9 to 5 or whatever it is, 5 days a week. This is, of course, has to do with the whole hybrid work environment. And I like the way this leader shared this. And Tamara, I'm interested in your opinion, including if you disagree with it. And that was this executive, I felt like it was very genuine when I think it was a gentleman said, as he was announcing to his team, listen, you may not need the connection. You may not feel the need to come back into the office, but others might. and they can't have the connection if you're not there. So whether you feel like you need it or not, our culture needs it. Other people in our offices need the connection. They may not have the social life you may not have. They may not have the outlets. And so part of our company, if you will, is to make sure that people build connection, build relationships, and have that, if you will, that momentum of what you get in person, which is kind of undeniable from what you don't. You say what on that topic?
I love the way this leader put it, because I think it's about other people, right? Other people matter. And if you are coming in and they're being clear that, okay, maybe you don't need this, but other people do, and you're coming in and it's this contribution that you're making for others, I think it frames it differently for people. I think it's ineffective when it's just a mandate of, you got to come in every day 9 to 5 because we're renting office space and things are better this way because culture is only created inside of walls. Well, people disagree with that because the psychological contract of work changed completely over COVID when we were able to be actually more productive, more focused at home. And so why should I come in? And so when leaders spotlight that why and give a compelling reason, it's much easier for us to then say, okay, I get it. And there is research that actually the younger generation, the Gen Z that's now in the workforce and entering the workforce, actually are missing out on mentorship opportunities and shadowing opportunities. And so there is a space for this for sure.
Beautifully said. There's no black or white, right? I think it's incumbent upon leaders to really set the context and explain the why. I saw where recently the CEO of Chase said, come back or you can't work here, which may have not been an exact quote, but it was pretty close to the quote. And that's true. Everybody needs to work. Not everyone needs to work here. But if you want to be part of creating meaningful work and a culture where people choose to come and choose to stay and choose to refer in, you have to set all the context for that. Okay, Wes, let's pivot over to you. My favorite chapter in all the book's content is the importance of beginnings. I'm just going to kind of open the mic to you, Wes, to have you riff on how vital and maybe prescriptive can you get about the connection between important beginnings and onboardings and meaningful work. You've got as long as you need, Wes.
This was something that came out of our research that was actually a little surprising to us, the huge impact that those first few moments during recruiting and onboarding have on the meaning of a job for the lifetime that someone is working for a company. It's that idea of making a good first impression, that first impression bias. And if you are talking about values, if you are talking about moments of meaning that happen at the company and helping people connect their work to bigger impact early on, that sets the tone that lasts for the rest of someone's employment with the company. And there are really a couple of things that we think about when we're thinking about this onboarding process, and that's cultural mastery and authentic relationship building with people. So cultural mastery is, instead of just handing someone a computer, getting them to fill out their I-9s and some paperwork and throwing them into the mix, how are we welcoming people into the culture of this organization? How are we telling the stories of how our values come to life, about where this organization comes from, about how it impacts customers, what we care about? Organizations like Patagonia do this incredibly well. Vincent Stanley is their director of philosophy there. He's been there 50 years since the beginning. And when people start working at Patagonia, they have sessions with Vincent where he just talks about the stories of the company, how it came up, what are some of the pivotal moments, why they chose to do certain things, that really welcomes you into the culture of that organization. And the second piece of that is the authentic relationship building. How are you as a leader not only building a relationship with a new employee and getting to know them, but also facilitating them getting to know other people as well? And that happens by setting up coffees for them, by making sure those first few weeks or first few months they have somebody to go to lunch with, that you're creating events where people can come together and get to know each other, and bridging those cross-organizational divides that can happen between departments. So there's a lot that leaders can do in those first few weeks, or even before those first few weeks, to set the tone. And that's a big intervention point that we found that is really being underused at this point, or underutilized.
Tamara, I'm going to invite you to add to that, because I think this is, of all of the research and all the stories that you wrote about, for me, this was the most consequential, given the fact that we're in a new world. Whether it's you're fully hybrid, or whether you're dispersed or geographic, I mean, I think increasingly the default is to hire people from anywhere and everywhere, as long as they're most talented. I spent close to 30 years with the FranklinCovey company as an employee, 25 of them as an employee, 5 of them almost as a contractor. And I couldn't imagine joining a new company. I'm an entrepreneur, fortunately. My wife thinks unfortunately, but as an entrepreneur now, I'm not having to get on Zoom calls with 70 people I don't know in a company, people I've never met. I don't have any social capital. I don't have any political capital. I don't have any institutional knowledge. If I was to join a new company, for someone who's pretty confident, I would be overwhelmed not knowing how to navigate people's experiences and such. I'm guessing now more than ever, it's important to make sure that if I was to join a new company, and say I live in Miami and the company's based in Cleveland, everybody is everywhere, getting stuff done, building rapport, building trust and relationships is hard. I would think it's vital for the organization to make sure that I have a chance to meet people, understand their backstory, what are their preferences, what are they responsible for. It's almost overwhelming to think that I would navigate a culture having almost no backstory about how work gets done here, kind of the real definition of culture.
Exactly. I mean, we think of culture as just, words on the wall. A lot of people think, oh, we have our values, here we go, this is our culture. But it really is much deeper than that, because those values don't mean anything if they're not lived right every day. And so people really need to know, like, how are things done around here? How are things approved? Like, what's the politics? And, how do things really work? And it was a really exciting finding for us, this surprising and lasting impact of these beginnings. And, for me, it really brought to light my own experience in moving to a new town and enrolling the kids in a new school. And it was an amazing experience, because the principal took the time to ask me to fill out a form with detailed information about each of my kids so she could get to know them a little bit. But then what she did was really remarkable, Scott. She paired each of my 3 children, who at the time were in 5th, 4th, and 2nd grades, with a buddy, right, in each of their classes that she selected specifically because that she thought they would have something in common. And then she introduced me to those families and made sure, that in that first day, like you said, your first day, you're showing up, you're a little nervous, you don't know anyone. It's the same as like you're with your tray in the cafeteria trying to find somebody to sit with and you don't know anyone. But my 3 kids did. They each had a buddy in their class who we had met with the week before school started, and they sat with them at lunch, and they went to recess with them, and they introduced them to other people. And that was really important. And when we were doing the research and learning about these beginnings and these intentional things that these organizations were doing to welcome people, to make them feel like they belong, to kind of take away that cafeteria with a tray, jitters of the first day, and give them access to, help and how do things get done around here. I mean, that made it so meaningful. And I think it's really important too. I think Wes talked about authenticity, but really welcoming people. One of the things that we tell in the book is the Patagonia practice of doing readmes, which is basically a very simple user manual for working with you. So what are my preferences? I wake up super early. I'm on email at 4 a.m. That doesn't mean I expect a response, but in the evenings I am with my kids, and so I might get delayed in responding there. So putting together these preferences of, I prefer text over email, and so people have those, and so when you come in, you read your team's readmes and you get to know them a little bit, and then you have your own. So there's really simple things that organizations can do that they are underutilizing to make these beginnings really meaningful.
Tamara, I'm going to come back to you in just a moment and talk about the power of positive feedback in chapter 7. Before I do that, Wes, I want to belabor this because isn't work basically junior high school? I mean, you're in one continuous lunch line with your tray, and then you turn, the moment of truth, after you swipe your ID to pay your bill, you turn and you say, where am I going to sit? You know, it's the same exact experience, especially when you've joined a new organization. Wes, maybe conclude this obsession I have with beginnings and onboarding with a couple of more points for anybody who is leading an organization. You're responsible for onboarding new employees, whether they're physically in the same location as you, maybe they're abroad, maybe they're in a different country or different culture or different part of the country. What are some other tactical things that leaders can do to make sure that new employees feel comfortable and heard and connected, and early on match the meaning of their work with the mission of the organization? There's no wrong answer. Wes, you say what?
I would say when people are coming onto the organization, we often have this pressure to get them up to speed very quickly. Usually we wait a long time to hire people. They're needed. We're backfilling positions, and we just want somebody in and working at full capacity as soon as possible. And we forget about all of this other stuff in the drive to productivity. And that's a mistake because it actually takes longer for someone to get up to speed and work effectively across an organization when you do that. And so urging leaders to take the time to actually think about intentionally how you're welcoming people in using some of these practices. I think especially if that person is in a different country or a different location, is a remote or a hybrid worker, you have to work extra hard to communicate that across the digital divide. And so I would say a couple of things. One, really being intentional about giving that person space to show up and talk about themselves so that people can get to know them as a whole person. Vivek Murthy, who's the former Surgeon General of the US, has a practice that he talks about that he instituted called the full story, where he gives folks 5 minutes one person at the beginning of each weekly meeting, 5 minutes to share a photo or an item or something that's meaningful to them and tell a story about it, not work related. And it allows people to see each other as whole people, find out they have things in common, build connections. And what he found was that really amplified their work, their collaboration, especially across departments where people weren't regularly interacting with each other. And so I think that's one thing that leaders can really make time for. And the other is just to continually be telling stories about what it means to work at the organization. Are you telling the story of, if I come on and I'm an accountant, let's say at your organization, are you making it clear to me how the work that I'm doing on spreadsheets is actually facilitating this team being able to do its job so that they can deliver for the customer? Are you drawing that line for me from my day-to-day work to the bigger impact that it's allowing to happen on the rest of the team, on customers, or whoever else the organization is serving? Because that's going to allow me to find moments of meaning in my daily work.
Wes, such a valuable point, because I think we should remind all leaders, you're probably under-communicating. You think you're over-communicating, but you're probably under-communicating because all the connections may be natural in your mind. That doesn't mean everybody understands all the connections between what they're doing and the profitability of your company, the mission and values of your organization, what the vision is. You probably cannot over-communicate that, especially if you're leading in a hybrid or a virtual environment. Tamara, the book is full of stories, so many great stories about Marriott and other organizations. One in particular really struck me. In chapter 7, you title it The Power of Positive Feedback. And although it's a pseudonym, you mention a woman that you call Kathy Rollins, and she works in an accounting firm. And as a result of that, she's inclined to look for mistakes and problems. And she has a ritual. I wonder if you could maybe elaborate on that environment and what's the lesson to be taken out from this story. Take your time on the story if you remember it.
Yeah, there was a great story. And so Kathy, pseudonym, we'll call her Kathy here. She is somebody she was in a series of leadership development that we did. And one of the things we were teaching was this power of positive feedback. And she told us that, as an auditor, she is trained to look for what's wrong, right? That's kind of how her brain works and is wired. And this idea of expressing gratitude or feedback or appreciation was really foreign to her work habits. And she decided that, so after the workshop, she was really interested in this because, we share data like one from Work Human and Gallup, that one thank you once a week from a manager is enough to cut disengagement in half. And positive feedback is so underutilized. Less than 40% of people think that they are adequately recognized, for the work that they do. And so she really wanted to embrace this practice. And what she decided to do was every Friday, so she set like a reminder on her calendar. Every Friday, she would send 5 notes of gratitude to somebody on her team. And she would be really specific, not just, hey, thanks so much. It was a great week. Have a great weekend, right? That's nice, but it's much nicer when you can say something like, hey, I noticed that this week you showed up so engaged, and that, report you put together had all the, customer profiles on it. And it was so creative. I noticed you using your strength of creativity. You brought that to life for us. And because of you, we landed that account, or we caught that mistake, or whatever the impact was. And you really appreciate the way you showed up and this week, and I'm excited to see what's next for you, or something like that. And it was these short notes of gratitude that were really specific. And she started doing that every Friday. She would send out 5. And, of course, it felt great for the people who got the email. They would respond and they would say, wow, thank you so much. This means a lot. Have a great weekend. But what's amazing, it's what happened after, she started doing this for a couple weeks. Then people on her team who were receiving the gratitude started also sending gratitude to other people on their team. It became like a contagious practice, right? Because there's emotional contagion that happens. So if somebody expresses gratitude to us, we feel gratitude towards them, and then we feel gratitude towards other people. And so it created this culture of positive feedback in her team where they were recognizing each other for meaningful contributions. And it really changed the way that they all work together. They really show up for each other better. They feel a sense of contribution, and work just became so much more meaningful.
The book is packed with great anecdotes like that are also very practical for all of us. Wes, let's end on this thought, the future of meaningful work. You open talking about the 3 C's: community, did I connect with somebody today? Contribution, is anything better in the world because of what I did today? What a great question to do in a roundup with your team. And then challenge, that I learned something new today. Wes, none of us have a crystal ball. We have no idea the true impact that AI is going to have on work. We know it is consequential. We know it is probably history setting. It's going to be massively disruptive in both probably positive and negative ways to the world as we know it. What does your work and research with Tamara, since writing this book, tell you about some insights we might want to be on the precipice of about how to create a culture in your team, in your organization, that is prepared for what the future looks like?
I will start by saying that I'm not an AI expert, but we had an opportunity to speak with a couple of really significant AI experts for that last chapter. And I think 2 big learnings came out of that. One is that how we design AI, how we program it, how we teach it to behave has a huge impact on the outcomes that we're going to get from using it. So I think one thing that we need to think about is who's involved in designing these things. Is it just the technologists? Are we asking people like psychologists, humanists, politicians, whoever else to contribute to what we want the outcomes to be here? Or is it just the tech companies who are designing it? Because that has a huge influence on how those things are going to turn out and which direction they're going to push us. I think regardless of that, the human skills, the skills of finding meaning, of leading people, are going to be so much more important in a world where AI can do a lot of these basic tasks that don't require those human skills. right? And so the things that we're talking about in this book, the tools, the leadership practices, the organizational structures, I think are going to become more important as we outsource some of these, more, I would say, rote tasks, and hopefully create the space for people to do more meaningful work with their time.
Your insight there is exactly what Keith Ferrazzi, a friend of mine and a guest on our podcast, is leading every year. I think a couple times a year, he brings together a confab of the top technologists, CTOs, CIOs, with the top people leaders, CHROs, chief people officers, together to make sure that they're working in sync around the role that AI plays, not just on the technology, efficiency, productivity side, but on the culture and engagement variables in their work as well. As we end, Tamara, of all the research, of all the interviews, of all your time spent with Wes as well, what's kind of the key takeaway you hope your reader absorbs from reading your book? Does one point stand out that to say, gosh, if you're going to do anything to create meaningful work, make sure you do this?
Make sure you connect with other people. Other people matter is one of the tenets of positive psychology and one of the tenets of meaningful work. The most powerful question we asked that led to this feeling of community and meaning through community is, do you know what's happening in your team's lives outside of work? And so if there's one thing that increases our sense of contribution and of community and of meaning at work, is this idea of caring about people, not just as cogs in a wheel, as transactional, task doers, but as humans with whole lives. And it doesn't cost anything, and it really doesn't take that long.
What a great send-off, right? Is I care not just what you can do for our organization, but I actually care about you and your life beyond that, because at some point everyone is going to leave. Some of them may return. Some of them actually may leave with a great appreciation for the culture and refer their friends in, which is actually, I think, why send-offs are equally as important as onboarding as well. Wes Adams and Tamara Myles, your new book is titled Meaningful Work: How to Ignite Passion and Performance in Every Employee. Tamara, thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Wes, thank you for joining as well.
Thanks for having us, Scott.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.